Bonjour, Indwena Makamug, Shkanshkawin Indigenous, Megazi and Dodame, Wanakin and Debandakos, Kawabigani Gokag in Donjaba, Ni Migwacha Wendam Omaya in Sago. Good evening, my relatives. My name is Pearl, and I wanted to give you a warm welcome to our virtual event. Thank you for joining us. I'm the program manager with Native Governance. Native Governance Center is a Native-led nonprofit dedicated to empowering Indigenous changemakers and nations. We encourage you to learn more about our programming by visiting our website, nativegov.org, or following our social media. We are on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Thanks again for joining our virtual event, Cultural Appropriation in the Wellness Space. Wellness practices can help us de-stress in our lives, and they might also raise major questions about cultural appropriation in Indigenous and by other BIPOC communities. And wellness for myself is a personal interest because of self-care and wellness for individual health is really important for community health. When you're able to take care of your own health, you're able to take care of your community. And when you do that in a good way, you really put good energy into your community. We're really excited for the panelists we have to join our conversation this evening. And I'm going to turn it over to our Master of Ceremonies, Deanna StandingCloud.
Thank you, Pearl, for the introduction. Gate Bikwe Indigenous, Deanna StandingCloud, Jaganashi Moening, Minawa, Bakanagijak, Wapabakwe, Indigo, Magazine do Dame, Miss Pagami Wizag, Egening and Dunjaba. So, my name is Deanna StandingCloud, and I am honored to be your host and your moderator for tonight's conversation about wellness, cultural appropriation in the wellness community. And I wanted to also thank our participants who purchased tickets earlier in the year. I know that this has been a long time coming with this event, and we've just been really resilient during our COVID, and we just were able to make this come together. So thank you for being here. My name is Deanna StandingCloud. I am a citizen of the Red Lake Nation of Anishinaabe people. I'm also currently the community engagement coordinator with Indigenous Lotus. So I work with Victoria, who is one of our panelists tonight. And I'm also a Native Nation rebuilder with the Native Governance Center. So I'm cohort 10, and I'm in my second year of that program. So I'm working on my presentation to the community of my storytelling, sovereignty through storytelling. So I'm really excited to be here. So tonight we have a good conversation that's very important. A lot of us seek wellness techniques and things in our community in order to keep ourselves kind of sane and keep ourselves whole. And we have so really an amazing panel of community members here and leaders. And so I want to invite our panelists to introduce themselves. We will start with Kou, and we'll just have everyone introduce themselves, and then we'll start asking questions and get into the conversation.
Hi everyone, this is Kou. Hopefully you can hear me okay. But my pronouns are he, him. I identify as a queer Hmong American. I'm based here in the Twin Cities. And I have a number of different hats. One of them as a healer in my community. And for me, that looks a few different ways. And I kind of see myself as very interfaith and also practicing multiple healing practices that I integrate, including energy healing, aspects of shamanism, and definitely connecting to my ancestors on the earth and bringing a historical trauma and trauma-informed lens to my work. So happy to be here and excited for the conversation today.
Thank you, Kou. And if we can go to Daniela to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Daniela Montoya-Barthelemy. I am originally from New Mexico. I've been here in the Twin Cities for 7 years now. My little business is called Mama Sin Vergüenza, and it was located in Indigenous Roots Cultural Arts Center up until more recently with COVID. Right now I'm working from home more so. It includes coaching and education in sexual and reproductive health, rooted in a framework of social justice and aiming toward decolonization. So that all means that I do full spectrum birth work, and so that means birth, postpartum, and support through any kind of loss or abortion. And that is all rooted in Mexican traditional medicine. I also do holistic health coaching and workshops and webinars and that kind of thing. And the other like twin pillar of my work is somatic experiencing. So thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here tonight.
Thank you, Daniela. And let's go over to Samsoche for his introduction.
Henche Estango Samsoche Giftos. Hello, my name is Samsoche Sampson, and I'm a hoop dancer from Muskogee and Seneca. Currently live in, well, we just moved up to Grand Rapids to my wife Fawn's area, to near her nation. So we're just unpacking, getting everything out of boxes and getting used to the surrounding areas, and kind of excited to get to work around here. I've been hoop dancing and performing for about 29 years. My brother and I started off in Southern California, moved to North Dakota, Wisconsin, New York, Kansas, Chicago, and then finally landed over here in the Twin Cities. I specialize in hoop dancing. I teach hoop dancing classes alongside my brother, which my brother did like every week at the Indian Center until COVID hit. So now we're trying to adapt and find new ways to bring the culture and the teachings forward to our youth. So thank you for having me here, and I look forward to this conversation. It's going to be an enlightening time.
Thank you, Sam. And we are going to Victoria for her introduction.
Hi, my name is Victoria. I'm a member of the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate. I am the founder of Indigenous Lotus, and the purpose of Indigenous Lotus is to help Indigenous people self-heal through mind-body connection. I am a RYT 200-hour yoga instructor. I am also a Y12SR leader, Yoga of 12-Step Recovery. I am also currently enrolled in a 300-hour yoga teaching program, as well as an integrative wellness and life coaching program, and pursuing my Bachelor's of Business degree at Metro State. I do a variety of things, from a lot of accessible yoga classes in the community, to events, and now we will be progressing this year with the use of the online platforms to workshops, and extend and going beyond yoga. So what are other techniques that we can use? And so thank Deanna for being a part of this journey with me, and yeah, thank you all for having me.
Thanks, Victoria. Okay, and last but not least, please welcome Gabrielle Roberts.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gabrielle Roberts. I am out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. I am an African-American woman. I own 612 Jungle. It's a hip-hop yoga studio here in Northeast Minneapolis. I have completed 2 different 200-hour training, so I am a registered yoga teacher. Also, currently, my studio is completing teacher training, so we are a registered yoga school. My desire or my passion specifically that I work for is spreading yoga to communities that you don't see it in, and communities that are underrepresented in yoga. Lately, I do have a space in Northeast Minneapolis, but due to COVID, I've been closed since March. Since then, daily, we've been offering free virtual classes, and we've also been occupying the Target Field Station. I held a demonstration, a moving protest earlier this summer called We Move for Change, just highlighting the violence that's taken place at the hands of the police and just the violence here in our Minneapolis streets. In addition to yoga, I am a full-time information technology auditor, so I wear a few hats. But I try to really be known in my community as a healer and someone who's really working towards educating the Black and Brown community when it comes to yoga.
Awesome. Thank you, Gabrielle. So I have a feeling that our conversation is going to be really, really good. So I want to get right to the questions. I know we have an hour and a half, but it really goes by fast when we're talking about something important. So I'm just going to ask a question, and whoever wants to answer the first question, just let me know. We have a few questions here, and then we'll turn it over to the Facebook Live, so the audience members will have an opportunity as well to ask questions of the panelists. So it's going to be a very interactive evening. But I'll just ask the first question and let me know who wants to take that one, and then we'll just kind of popcorn around. So the first question we have this evening: what is cultural appropriation, and why is it harmful to BIPOC communities? So Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. Why is it harmful? And anyone can take it. So Gabriella.
Hi, hello everyone. So I guess I'll be the first one to start off here, but cultural appropriation to me is taking from one's culture and using in a different culture. Specifically, I think it has to do when you're taking from a culture that is historically oppressed. Specifically speaking of my culture in itself, I feel like my culture experiences cultural appropriation when it comes to yoga, using hip hop music in yoga. Specifically, there's a studio, or was a studio out of New York, where they used hip hop music from an oppressed people, Black people, you know, and they bump it in these studios where people come in and occupy the space. But no one in this studios look like the people who create the music. And in a sense, to me, that's cultural appropriation in itself, because you're taking from my culture, my people. I think hip hop is dominated by Black people, and taking and you know, moving and grooving and making millions of dollars off of the music from my people. And I think that it completely resonates with cultural appropriation in the sense that, you know, a lot of the songs, the people that occupy those places that pay $27 for a yoga class, there's Black and brown people from my culture that could never even dream of having an additional $25 or $27 to go 4 times a week to better themselves. And then I think it even goes further, because you have to look at the larger link of where cultural appropriation is taking place in and what it's based in. And that comes from oppression, that comes from stealing from other cultures, that comes from colonization. And even when you look at the cultural appropriation of yoga in itself, this is a devotional practice, and it used to be offered for free. And now it's a multi-million-dollar business. And I think that's cultural appropriation in itself, because you're taking from one culture, using it in another culture, and specifically an oppressed culture. When you look at the roots of yoga, it started in the Indian culture. Straight out of India, it was used as a devotional practice and a way to get closer to oneself. So I think, to me, that's cultural appropriation, taking from one culture, specifically an oppressed culture, and using it in another culture specifically for monetary gain and benefit.
Thank you so much. That was delivered so super powerfully, and you got me really riled up. So, but I'm gonna ask the same question. And I think Daniela wants to take a stab at the question. Do you want it repeated to you, Daniela?
Sure.
Okay. What is cultural appropriation, and why is it harmful to BIPOC communities?
So I think Gabrielle was right on with what cultural appropriation is, but I just wanted to add to how else it's harmful that we don't often think about. So part of the work that I do is helping people to kind of get regulated in their nervous systems and learn how to regulate their nervous systems. And one of the things that, or one of the many, many benefits of our traditions is a regulation of our nervous system, not only within ourselves as an individual, but also with our community, with nature, with spirit, right? So all of those getting regulated together through our different practices. So for example, one of the things that my family participates in is danza. So you've seen us out there with our copal burning and our feathers and the drums and our dancing, right? And when, it wasn't that long ago that even here in the Twin Cities, danza was actually outlawed. So every time our group, Kapulia Sanoshli, would go and practice, my teacher talks about how every time they would try to just go and practice in the park, the cops would be called and they would be pushed out, right? So when cultural practices like that get outlawed, and when they, over time through colonization and all of the horrible things that have happened, those things have actually created a biological response in our bodies by not being able to regulate with each other, within ourselves, with our spirits, with our ancestors, right? And so when all of those things get thrown off, and our nervous systems are actually in this very like highly regulated place where, dysregulated place, right? Where we're actually in this like inflamed situation, then we have chronic illnesses that we see that are popping up a whole lot more and are much, much more substantial in communities of color. And so that's one of the harmful ways in which biologically it actually affects us, and we don't even think about it, right? We don't even think about it, that it's like in that direct way. And so I just wanted to add that piece. Thank you.
Thank you for talking about that, because I was just thinking about that myself, and how, just within the cells of our bodies, colonization is actually a biological reaction. It's inside of our bodies. So thank you for saying that, Daniela. So we're gonna continue with this question. I know Victoria, I'll ask you to touch on this as well. So what is cultural appropriation, and why is it harmful to our communities of color?
So Gabrielle and Daniela, right on, taking bits and pieces of culture, traditions, and using it for monetary gain, without any appreciation or actual knowledge to where it actually comes from. And by doing this, you also, within people who, like say for Indigenous people here, there are a lot of people who have lost that sense of identity, right? And so when you're trying to learn about your culture, learn about your history, there's this confusion that's brought about, like, oh, well, I was taught this when I was in elementary school by, my white teacher, and now this is what it is, and so there's a lot of confusion when it comes to identity, I feel, when cultural appropriation is just all over the place. And so for me, I had that growing up, where I went to a majority white school, and then, trying to learn about my culture, because my family, they come from the background of having that stripped, and heavy colonization and Christianity happened. And So you have all these things. So it was like an identity crisis, you know, like, who am I? And so I feel like it, you know, that's something I wanted to add is that piece to it, you know, and it's systematic thievery by our oppressor, you know, so.
Thank you, Victoria. So I will also ask, I know Kou wanted to answer this question, and then I have another question. So we'll move on to the next question after Kou answers the first question. So what is cultural appropriation and why is it harmful to us?
Yeah, first just want to say ditto, co-sign to everything you all already said. Definitely resonating with my interpretation as well. And for me, that the biggest piece for me when I think about the harm to our communities is that for myself, and I think for many of us, because of histories of colonization and genocide and oppression, I had never been able to fully know or understand or was raised with many of the cultural healing practices of the Hmong people. And so, you know, and Hmong historically in Asia are an ethnic group, a hill tribe, indigenous to Asia and China, and for centuries within Asia have been oppressed. And then with the Vietnam War and the refugees fleeing to America, just adding layers of migration, forced migration, displacement. And so we left with the scraps of our clothing and our memories that otherwise were erased through history books and documents. Everything was burned when we left. And so coming to America and knowing that there was so little that we were able to hold on to and have passed down from our parents, and also, especially, you know, with my parents, with trauma, wanting to forget everything. And so actually not learning much from my parents because they wanted us to assimilate. And so the harm is from when folks take aspects of our culture that they want to take and see that, feel like they can own those things when we really have not even had access to those in some cases, further causes harm. And I think just, you know, two quick examples that I think about, you know, one time I was in a meeting that a foundation convened and I was a participant, and they had paid this white facilitator to facilitate the space. And her opening activity was using a Hmong ball that we traditionally use at Hmong New Year's, the celebrations. It's kind of part of like a courting ritual. But that was her opening activity, to pass this ball around. But then she looked at me and was like, "Oh, do you want to explain what this is?" And so, you know, it's like, okay, well, I'm not getting paid to facilitate this meeting. So, you know, cultural appropriation in that sense. And then also, you know, Hmong fabrics and many hill tribe fabrics are really trendy right now. And so we see, you know, fashion designers in Europe using our textiles that they get from Thailand and then selling them as like couture dresses. And I forget who it was, like the Duchess of Wales or something wore this tribal outfit. And again, they're benefiting from that with no tie to where it historically came from or the trauma that we've endured.
Thank you, Kou. I was just thinking about how, in order for us to reclaim a lot of our wellness, because that's what a lot of our, you know, our people are doing, is reclaiming and revitalizing our languages. We need to feel like we're in a safe space. So in order for us to even, you know, recalibrate our nervous systems, like Daniela was mentioning, we have to feel safe. So I'm going to move on to the next question, but with that, Sam, what do you think we lose when we allow cultural appropriation to happen in wellness spaces?
Was it me? Called me.
I'm calling on Samsoche.
Yeah. So yeah, it's I feel this question kind of touches on a lot with like the first question, and what everyone said is right on the nail, hit the nail on the head. What I feel we lose a lot is when all that appropriation happens, what it does lastly is exclude all of our communities from the conversation. And that is a huge part of why it's so harmful, is because we get that exclusion. We get relegated to just being a footnote to where this healing or where this practice comes from. And I feel that in order to rectify that, we need to have a seat at the table where we are included in the conversation of how these practices are being facilitated, where rather than just being, oh, I learned this from so-and-so, so I'm gonna go teach it, without any reference to the context of the history or of the stories of the meaning behind each of these practices and wellness and stuff. So.
Right, the original intent and the teachings and things kind of get I understand what you're saying. So thank you for sharing, Sam. If anyone, if I'll ask the question, and if any of the panelists want to tackle that one. So why don't we actually just go to Gabrielle? What do we lose when we allow cultural appropriation to happen in wellness spaces?
I think I think it's not just one thing that we lose. There's multiple things. One being the authenticity of it. Two being the meaning. I think specifically speaking about yoga, when I go into these spaces, this used to be a very devotional practice, and a practice that's used to connect deeper with yourself. And when I go into these spaces, I see that the practice is more physical than anything. People now look at yoga as a cardiovascular exercise, or a way to get stronger, or, a way to do handstands and put their feet in the air, not even realizing that before anything, it's a practice of breath, a way to completely ground and root yourself, and a way to create space between you and your reaction to the things that are out of your control. So I think when cultural appropriation exists in these places, we lose authenticity, we lose the understanding and the meaning, and then it becomes more of a practice about ourselves, about the physical, the outer, not inner. Additionally, I think that when cultural appropriation takes place specifically in the yoga realm, it's led by those who are ignoring oppression. I mean, when you look into spaces, and specifically from a monetary perspective, I think that's what's the limiting factor for so many people participating in this. When you look at the cost of a class, that's led by people that are the oppressors. They don't have a problem spending $30. They don't think twice about it. They come in with a $120 pair of leggings. They have just spent $400 on getting their hair done, or a Louis Vuitton duffel bag, or coming from a place where they don't have to worry about where their next meal is coming from, or what housing is going to look like for them. They've probably never, and this isn't to say every single person, but the majority of them, those who predominantly occupy the space, they don't really know, or nor can they relate to the struggle or the idea of having something taken away from them and not having an outlet, simply because they don't have the money for it. And then lastly, I think that it becomes sellable. And when something's sellable to the point that it's not even to cover the space that you're using, if you're not getting grants from the state or the city, when it becomes sellable to where you're selling a shirt that has an Om symbol on it for $120 and throwing spiritual gangster on there or anything else, you lose the value. I know people that wear shirts with an Om on it, or say the word gratitude, or, a Sanskrit word or anything like that, who have no idea about the practice, who just simply bought it because of the tag that's on there. And I think when cultural appropriation occupies these spaces, it loses the main point. And specifically speaking to yoga is to connect with ourselves and parts of ourselves that were taken away through oppression. parts of ourselves that oppression specifically tried to get rid of. So when I think of cultural appropriation and when it's in the wellness space, those are the things that stick out and infuriate me. They make me so frustrated because that's what turned me off from yoga in the first place. It was something I didn't connect with and I just could never afford it. So I made sure to align myself and make it affordable for people in the community that need it.
Oh, thank you. I don't know what we didn't hear, but thank you, Gabrielle. That was real. I really appreciate those comments. Victoria, can you answer the question as well?
Yes. Gabrielle, your fire, I love it. I appreciate you. And just to add to everything Gabrielle said, you know, when it comes to allowing that in the wellness space, it takes away the power, right? The purpose of what we're doing. And the same thing, you know, when it comes to yoga, I didn't even know that that was something I was learning back, you know, when I was a teenage mom. You know, I just needed help. And the community, you know, coming from a community that also struggles with that connectedness, right? That oneness, that with the spirit, the mind, the body, the breath. So, you know, coming from that, I had no idea what I was even getting myself into. And then as I began to practice yoga, starting with meditation, it was referred to white people stuff. And it was always like, when I would practice it, people would make me feel bad about it. And I was like, you know, I'm going to learn more about this because it actually is helping me heal, you know. And as Indigenous people, and not just Indigenous people, you know, a lot of us who've been oppressed, so disconnected from our bodies, you know, and then we ignore everything our body is telling us. You know, we allow that survivor mind, that survivor brain take over. And I think when we lose our power, that's when we lose everything, you know. And so it's important to teach people. You see appropriation, call people out, tell them it's not okay, you know, let them know what this is. And I feel like if we just continue sticking together, we continue, you know, this collective and this community support on wellness, you know, we can gain that power together, you know, and heal this space. But thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. I know Kou wanted to also respond to the question. What do we lose when we allow cultural appropriation into wellness spaces?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add is that I think we lose the sacred. And so, you know, the sacred is what ties us in our holistic wellness practices to our ancestors and to those who came before us and created the practices that we're trying to step into. And so, you know, when cultural appropriation happens, it erases that. And then I think, you know, the other things I was going to say just echo what has already been shared, that then it just further displaces us, and it makes the spaces where we could have found healing feel like we are othered in that space, even though those are places we should belong. And then I think also I just want to give a shout out to Gabrielle, because I've taken classes at 612, and it has been a space where I have felt welcome and where I can connect and align mind, body, and spirit because of the intention that's created around that. And I think that's really what's really critical in the practice, because, you know, I think for myself and for many of us, you know, we're drawing from traditions that are global, but it's really about the intention and how you practice.
Thank you.
I think we're all gonna hit you up after this for a class, Gabrielle, because because yes, it's going down at 612. So I'm actually gonna move on to the next question, and if Daniela, if you would like to respond, that would be amazing. So the next question, what advice do you have for those looking to practice wellness responsibly and avoid cultural appropriation?
Yeah, so I think that one of the biggest things is to get used to and normalize asking questions where teachers got their practice from, you know. So in the birth community, there's been a lot of cultural appropriation around rebosos, for example, right? And so getting used to asking your teachers, where did these practices come from? Who did you learn from? What guidelines did you get this from? Where is this is this a part of your ancestry, or did you get permission to do this outside of your ancestry from your teacher? And then also just being really reflective of your own practices, making sure that you're asking the questions yourself of how you're using these things, asking questions of your teacher about your own intentions. You know, how do you feel about me passing this on to other people? What would feel good for you in order for me to be able to do that? And I think a big part of it is us normalizing those difficult conversations, because especially here in Minnesota, I've noticed everybody kind of wants to play nice about things and not really say the things that are difficult, you know. But having that groundedness to really speak honestly with your teachers and with yourself and each other is a big part of staying with integrity with those practices.
Thank you. Yes, that's an amazing answer. And I think also for us too is just normalizing giving the correct information or having, I know sometimes I would get crazy questions, but I would answer a lot of those questions from the white lady or something asking cultural questions. And I think it's important, and I know it sounds kind of silly at the time, but I think it's good that I was there to give her the correct information. So I appreciate that answer. I'm gonna go to Sam and ask the same question. So Sam, what advice do you have for those looking to practice wellness responsibly and avoid cultural appropriation?
Like what Daniela was saying is ask questions. Never stop asking questions. So when me and my brother travel around, the number one question we get wherever we go is, are those hula hoops? And we're like, nope. And that makes us as cultural teachers and practitioners have to know our stuff even that much more. So we have to go into the history of both the hoop dance and the hula hoop. So we have to explain the difference between the two and the usage in the both of them. But yeah, I would say ask questions. And if you want to go somewhere and learn something, go be a part of that community, because we're always willing to accept people into our communities if they want to learn authentically and genuinely and learn those practices. So when you become a part of that community, their fight becomes your fight. It's not, you're not a tourist or you're not a guest. You're going to be a part of that community, and that community is going to be a part of you. So I feel that to avoid appropriation in that sense, it would make it better to be a part of that community, whatever it is that you want to learn or practice. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Kou, do you want to respond to the question?
Yeah, I think one of the things I was thinking of is to practice mindfulness in order to not do cultural appropriation, and that concept really, came from one of my teachers that I really looked to in Buddhism, Thich Nhat Hanh, who was a famous Vietnamese Buddhist monk, and really, his goal was really to bring Buddhism to the West and to make it mainstream and accessible to anyone, and with mindfulness really as that practice of being present, being intentional with everything that we do. And I just, that makes me think about my own practice. And really, I grew up Christian, but I practice Buddhism now, meditation, and I'm also trained in Reiki energy healing, which comes from Japan. And so I think, to what other folks were saying, really, when you're learning these practices or modalities, that key of really relying on your teachers to understand the lineage that it comes from, so that you're rooted to that. So if it wasn't your ancestors who were doing those practices, that you can still be tied to that lineage, and again cultivate a sacred practice, because ultimately with healing and wellness, we want to return to the sacred, because so much in society right now has been made unsacred by consumption and consumerism, like many folks have mentioned too.
Thank you, Kou. I think, in the Native community, we, we're used to a lot of our sacred items being commodified. So I appreciate your answer and your response. It's, very thoughtful, and I'm actually taking notes. Victoria, if you want to take a chance to respond to the same question.
Yeah, can you read the question again, please? You're on mute.
Oh, okay. What advice do you have for those looking to practice wellness responsibly and avoid cultural appropriation?
First, I would have to say, get to know your own roots, know your own culture, get to know your own culture, but then also practice cultural competence, right? So being aware and understanding, ask questions, and when you are, I lost my words, but when you are in these classes, in these spaces, ask yourself too, does this align with my own beliefs? Is this something I embody as well? So just a few tips, especially in the yoga space, practicing those things. And I know for us in Indigenous people, I get asked as an Indigenous person, I get asked these questions in the yoga space about certain things, such as smudging, such as the animal spirit. That is what gets me every time. The use of the word tribe. If tribe is not in your culture, do not use it. The words goddess and references like that, understand where those come from. What is this? Where does it come from? How can I learn more about it? How can I help the community it comes from? So if I come from privilege, or if I'm able to help, how can I help South Asian people when it comes to yoga? How can I help the Desi community? What can I do to contribute to their causes as well, and the things that they are going through?
Thank you, Victoria. So I'm gonna ask another question, I know, and then we will be able to go to the audience questions. I'm gonna go over to Gabrielle and ask the final question that I have here. And then I'm hoping that all of the panelists will be able to answer this question before we get to the Q&A. So Gabrielle, In your opinion, what is the most important thing folks can do to stop cultural appropriation in the wellness space?
I think to diversify their experience and to familiarize themselves with the idea of, or the understanding that these spaces aren't occupied equally. But the best thing that they could do is diversify their experience. You know, I never try to go to the same instructor all the time. I try to get a different viewpoint. I think for similar reasons, if you look at your body, if you're active in the fitness realm or you go to the gym, you don't go to the same class consistently, you know, because eventually that's all you know, or you don't do the same workout consistently. If you're trying to build bigger legs, you're not just going to squat every day. You're going to diversify what muscles you're working on. And I think that people should take that same approach. Just diversify your experience. You know, if you're aware that there's a Southeast Asian, a Hispanic, an Indian, a Black instructor, a white instructor, like why only subject yourself to one person? And it's usually that person that's not readily available, but the person that comes from an organization that has the money to buy the ads, so they're the first one that pop up on Google, to have this elaborate facility because they have the funds to spend it. You know, really, I really encourage people to look past what's readily available at the eye, because amazing things exist out there, amazing people exist out there. And in order to, you know, even fight cultural appropriation, first thing that people must do is understand. And even understanding that these practices are indigenous, you know, they come from different cultures, understanding that specifically, and then gaining from that and learning from your experience, but still keeping your experience and your practice deeply rooted in the original reason for yoga, specifically speaking in the yoga sense, or anything else. I think that that's something that's really important and necessary. So.
Yes. Thank you, Gabrielle. So Daniela, if you want to answer the same question, in your opinion, what is the most important thing folks can do to stop cultural appropriation in the wellness spaces?
So speaking from someone who is a teacher myself, and like if you are a business owner, I think that in that way, I've seen recently now like it popping up in a few different ways where different business owners are taking on things that don't necessarily, or like a name of something that is actually from a culture that is not theirs, for example, and putting that in their title, you know. When you're doing that kind of thing, just stopping. And again, I'm going to go back to, you know, asking yourself these hard questions of why do I think that I'm entitled to this thing that belongs to a different culture? For myself, like I know, you know, what Victoria was saying resonated with me as far as, you know, being Chicana from New Mexico, our mixing and our culture, like it really, so much has been lost along the way because of colonization, because of Catholicism. And one thing has like supplanted the next, right? And so for me, as far as reclaiming some pieces of my roots, it's been a very long journey. And so even for me, I've, you know, had to really ask hard questions of what is mine and what is not mine. And like sitting with those questions, people that, and then I go and I see people that are like not from our culture at all. And they are like just ready to swoop up those words, those names, those, you know, really important sacred meanings and use them for their own profit and not even employ our people, you know, that kind of thing. Like asking yourself, why are you entitled to these things?
Thank you, Daniela. I mean, I'm not sure who's ready to ask themselves what, you know, what they're entitled to yet, but that's the perfect place to start. Reflecting, asking themselves why they think that they have, you know, have the access to all these things. So thank you for that. I know it's a difficult thing for people, and it's kind of an internal thing. So Sam, if you can respond to the question as well, in your opinion, what is the most important thing folks can do to stop cultural appropriation in the wellness spaces?
I think, in my opinion, I think it's more or less reach out to those communities, because there's probably a practitioner that's more than happy to come and teach your group or your people that want to learn authentically, genuinely, and just include them in the conversation, bring them to the table. Like my brother and I, we travel throughout the whole country. Like, we're more than happy to travel, go anywhere that people want us to come teach. So I think it's just being mindful that there are practitioners and cultural teachers that are more than willing to come out to wherever you're at to share their knowledge with you in a way that would be honoring that tradition and that culture. If there's none available, like everyone was saying, be introspective and ask yourself where your people come from, where your culture is from, because everybody's indigenous to somewhere. So it's up to us all to find our indigeneity in ourselves, because we all have different stories, different cultures, different lands. So we have different ways of living within each of those lands, and that we all have different stories and teachings to share with each other that could help each other out during this crazy time where we're all trying to adapt and find new ways of being, trying to cope with each month as a new episode of craziness. So yeah, reach out and have a teacher from that, whatever you're trying to teach, come to your space, and they'll be more than happy to do that. Just include us in the conversation.
Great, Sam. We're all indigenous to somewhere. I always say that. People ask me if they're, are they native? Are they indigenous? I'm like, well, they're indigenous to somewhere. So that's always what I say. One of the things I say. Kou, if you could also respond, in your opinion, what is the most important thing that folks can do to stop cultural appropriation in the wellness spaces?
Yeah, actually, Sam, your point was really where I was headed to, which was, looking at my own journey of, learning from healing practices and cultures and traditions from around the world. What they all did was lead me back to myself and to my people and to connect me to my ancestors. And so, part of my journey and my mission right now is to really bring ancestral healing to the Hmong community, because by connecting and healing not only ourselves, but our healing through our ancestors and healing our ancestors, it heals our trauma that we see today, right? And so my hope for anyone is that as you seek out healing practices, it brings you back to yourself and your own journey. And so in using that frame as a practice, asking yourself these questions that I think we have been coming up throughout this conversation around, having intention, having mindfulness, and really holding that question of, what is sacred here, and how am I holding that truth of what is sacred as well? And am I doing it justice in my practice of it, or am I distorting it in some way?
Thank you, Kou. This conversation is amazing. I'm multitasking, but I'm still taking a lot of the answers in. Victoria, if you want to respond to the last question, I have a number of questions that the audience have submitted. So if you want to take a stab at the last question, we can move on to some of the audience questions as well.
Will you read that last question, please?
Yes. In your opinion, what is the most important thing folks can do to stop cultural appropriation in the wellness spaces?
Stopping cultural appropriation in the wellness space. Knowledge, experience, go and experience these different practices from where they derive from. So if you're here in America, in the West, And for yoga, for example, find somebody who has that in their background. That's a part of their culture. Ceremonies, find somebody who is Indigenous. Ask them these questions. Get out of your comfort zone. Don't be afraid. That's what is the hardest thing. And I myself have had to do that on many occasions, you know, step out of my comfort zone, be somewhere where I'm completely just out of place. And that's when you realize, that's when those, you know, you really realize all those hard things, right? Like all those questions you need to ask yourself. Who am I? Why am I here? You know, again, does this align with, you know, my belief system, you know? And when you're a teacher, you know, are you a teacher or should you be a practitioner? You know, and so constantly asking yourself these questions, you know, knocking down those layers, putting the ego back aside for a little bit and those previous beliefs, you know, and educate yourself and do it with an open mind and do it with an open heart. And I think that's when you will really learn the true meaning and the sacredness of these teachings in the wellness space and what they really mean.
That's beautiful, Victoria. Thank you. I'm really glad that you mentioned opening your hearts, because I feel like with wellness, we can't really move forward or progress or evolve if everyone's really in their minds, but if we give some of our responsibility to our heart and to our spirit, a lot of that kind of is a little bit more balanced. So I appreciate you mentioning that, because I think that's been suppressed so long that we, you know, it's not easy to talk about using your heart a lot. So we have some really good questions from the audience. I'm gonna just put this first one out there, and whoever wants to answer or respond, just let me know, and then we'll kind of we'll try to answer as many of these as possible. So here's one of the first questions that I have here. Do you have any advice on what we as BIPOC people can help stop the commodification of our culture? For example, using like sage or smudging, or, you know, like those little smudge kits. So any advice on that, and just let me know who wants to respond to that. Or I'll call on someone. So Gabrielle.
Okay. I think that, and I say this, being aware of also how draining it is. I think it starts with education. Specifically when you talked about smudging, you know, I wasn't necessarily aware that you weren't supposed to buy sage, that it was supposed to be gifted to you, from my understanding from one of my Native friends. And that's something that I wasn't aware of. And I think first becoming aware of different things that we do as BIPOC people in general, you know, that we may not specifically be aware of, and then thinking, hey, there's other people in the world that may not be aware of this also. When I think of, you know, even little conversations that I have with family or friends, you know, there's some things that I feel very strongly about, and some things that I feel like I'm very knowledgeable about that some people may not necessarily understand, you know. And I say it understanding that it is draining, because some of it should necessarily be common sense, you know. But just making sure that we are educating and stopping or bringing it to the table when we see cultural appropriation taking place. I think, you know, as BIPOC people, we are so used to burdens being placed on us. And I think that we're a resilient people, and it's not something that we can't push past. It's just, you know, that extra burden that, you know, as the oppressed people, it's something that, you know, we have to do, protecting our culture, the culture of our friends, and then educating people. But I think specifically as a Black woman myself, you know, I need to take the extra step and educate those who are completely unaware. Those who who I even have, you know, not friends, but I know some people who I feel like try to get so much gain off of yoga, or, you know, they're trying to spin it in a way so that they can make money off of it. And I have to come in and check them myself as just an instructor. You know, if someone invites me to do something and, you know, they're like, oh, we're going to charge people $100 to come on this virtual retreat, I'm not taking part in it, because the $100 is absolutely ridiculous. And the people that I want to, you know, attract, and the people that I feel passionately about spreading the practice to, can't necessarily afford that. So I think putting our foot down and educating those around us is something that's important. So.
You're on mute, Deanna.
Oh my God. And then I have it on off mute when it's not time. Anyway, thank you, Gabrielle. Education is very important. I mean, I think everyone here on the panel can talk, you know, speak to a time when they had to educate in real time right there on the spot. So a teaching moment for adults and peers. Victoria or Sam or Daniela, do you want to, I know Victoria had her hand up, respond to, do you have any advice, what we can do as a community to just stop the commodification of our culture?
Yes, so because of in the yoga space, sage, for example, is very heavily used and sold and mistreated and abused. So I would suggest, when you see it, again, with that open heart and that open mind, be aware that that person has that lack of knowledge and that lack of understanding. So when you approach that person, you do it with well intention. Hey, this is what this is. This is where it derives from. And if you're offended, let them know that. But do it in a way that's not aggressive and angry. Because that's when you get, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Then they react the same way. So just doing it coming from a place of well intention. That's what I would suggest. And that's how I have been going about it. The more I see it, the more I'm calling it out as safe as I can possibly do it.
I think that's key to doing it with compassion. Just having compassion for people who have no idea kind of what they're doing. The compassion that was missing during the whole, you know, colonization process that was upon us, but our original teachings are, you know, we are all relatives. We do have compassion for one another. So thank you, Sam. So do you have any advice for our communities on how to stop cultural appropriation, just like the sage and all that stuff? Do you have any response to that?
Yeah, as far as that goes, it's like a big warning sign, and I try to explain this to everybody. It's like, if you have to pay for it, it's probably not legit or authentic. You should never have to pay for something like that. It should be given. And then also, like what to Victoria was saying, is like educate. And if they have questions, answer questions if you can. And if you see like some of your friends, or even if you just see someone that starts like considering buying something like that, just like step up to them and just educate them a little bit about the history and the use and the meaning behind it, and like explain to them like you should never have to pay for this type of stuff, and that this is like a very strong medicine, and that it's only to be used in these circumstances and not to be as like a trend or a fad kind of thing. So yeah, a lot of it is just like education and being mindful and being aware, and just being available to answer questions in a sense too. So
thank you, Sam. Daniela, you know what? I'm actually gonna shift to another question, but we'll go to Daniela, and then Kou, if you want to also respond to this next question. I just want to make sure that we touch on a lot of the the questions that our audience has. So this is kind of a longer question. Because of colonization, so many of our communities were not raised with our traditional practices. So we feel ourselves to call to remember them. How can we handle feeling like we are appropriating our own culture or not knowing how to access this knowledge? So that's verbatim, but I feel like it's kind of like, how do we approach accessing our own culture when we're kind of disconnected ourselves?
Yeah, so actually this is perfect that I got this question. For myself, I started on a long path that that I didn't realize I had actually already been on, right? Toward reclamation in some ways. When I had my first baby, I had a traumatic C-section. It was a very difficult situation, a really unexpected illness. And in healing from that birth, there was like, I was new to the Twin Cities, right? And this other Chicana that I had like just recently met told me, you know, there's somebody who's coming into town and she's this teacher, and I know you love like womb wellness stuff, and she's gonna have some traditional stuff. Why don't you come and check her out? And I was like, okay, you know, all right. And I go, and it was like, I had been asking for this teacher, right? I had been calling her in, and my life changed like meeting this teacher. And so I think one of the first things that we need to do is call in those teachers that we're seeking from our own culture, from our own traditions. Start calling them in now. Set intentions in any way that feels appropriate for you, and start calling them in, and then start doing your research, start looking around, and start putting the word out there that this is what you're looking for, right? And when you are able to connect to someone that feels authentic for you, start learning. Ask how you can learn from them, and in what way would feel good for that exchange. So my teacher, one of my teachers that I met that day is Pankitsani of Indigimama. And she does a lot around our practices for postpartum specifically, but all around womb wellness and holistic sexual health and all of these pieces. So, so yeah, just really, I think getting grounded in what your intentions are and calling in that teacher, and then navigating that path together, because the thing is, it is a very difficult thing. It is a very difficult thing to start wrestling with those questions. And also having that oversight of that teacher is super important. And then having conversations with other people that are like you, that may be going through very similar paths of having lost our culture, right? And so like leaning on each other to make sure that we're feeling grounded in our path.
Thank you for sharing your personal experience. I know that I really connected to that in my personal journey, and having a teacher there. And I was lucky to have a mentor, and that really grounded me and propelled me into the next phase of my life and just becoming a woman. So I appreciate you sharing your story. So Kou, if you can also respond. So colonization has really stripped a lot of our community members of their identity, and just what, how do we go about reclaiming that our traditional practices and still like not, I guess we have kind of exploited our own culture in a way because we're kind of ignorant. So if you can talk about us reclaiming and being on our own traditional path. I think that's what the question is asking.
Yeah, that question is so powerful. and I think hits home for me as well. And Daniela, a lot of what you said I thought was really powerful, and particularly setting the intentions and looking for your mentors and teachers. And so, I mean, for myself, so, you know, I'm queer, and I grew up on the on the East Coast in a small rural town in a very conservative Christian Hmong church. And so very specific community and very different from, I think, folks who grew up in the Twin Cities. But for a number of reasons, I was told that I was not, I did not belong, or I was not enough in either the religion or the community or in my cultural group. And there was like no other, it was a very small Hmong community. So I've never felt like I was authentically anything. And I think my whole life journey to date has been about trying to find what it means to be enough in any of those bubbles, whether that's Hmong or you know, a man or anything. And I think you know, as I came into my healing work and learning that I had these spiritual gifts, you know, I grew up Christian and wasn't practicing. My family never practiced shamanism, but I had these gifts and I didn't know what to do with it. And so I've always sought out the intention for teachers, either for my spiritual life or for connecting to my culture. And I think what was required of me that I had to learn over time was that my teachers will always show up when I ask for them, but they may not look like what I thought it would look like or who they would look like. And so the openness to connect to those teachers that may not even be from your cultural background, but have so many lessons to teach you, to connect you back to what it means to authentically be you in your body in this lifetime, and how that, again, connects you to your lineage, even if you may have been disconnected from that in so many different ways, and to not feel like there's a right way to connect to that, and to really find what that is for you.
Thank you, Kou. That's, all of this resonates so much with me, and I'm really thankful to be here and listening to all of this. So there's actually a question, and I think I'll just go to Victoria or Gabrielle, specifically about yoga. I know Kim had asked this question quite a while ago, but I'll go to either Victoria or Gabrielle. How does cultural appropriation affect those of you who are practicing yoga, which is not from your own culture?
Yeah, so just like a lot of people here in the West start, you kind of see it around. I actually was just introduced to it through a book. I didn't know anybody of any race that practiced yoga at all. I had no idea. But I was coming across it in books, which I'm sure were written by white folks, you know, I'm not sure. But that I stayed connected to yoga because there was at a time where I struggled so hard in life with trying to find out who I am. I'm this teenage mom. I'm like feeling this shame of feeling like I was nothing, right? So like feeling shame, feeling guilt, not having an identity. I really resonated with this practice. And so as I got older and I decided, hey, yoga helped me in a really tough time find out who I was. I want to teach it. And as I learned more about the culture, more about the practice, the history, the philosophy, where it originates from, in what religions it's brought up in as well, I started to take that deeper dive. I didn't want to say, hey, okay, this isn't my culture or anything. I felt this connection. So I wanted to take that deeper dive and further educate myself. And so especially this whole year, just at the end of last year, I really stopped and thought completely about who I am, what I'm doing, what my purpose is, and what I'm putting out there for the community. And appropriation, obviously, it was one of those things that comes up. And so to not appropriate yoga as it is so heavily done so, I decided to learn more about it. How can I teach yoga and not be harmful? How can I create space for people to come that is accepting and open and welcoming? And as I continue to do more research, a lot of people know of Yoga is Dead podcast, and with Tejal and Jaisal, I really started looking in on what they were doing and following them on social media and really reading into the community that they come from, being Desi, like I had mentioned before, and subscribing to the Patreon, ABCD Yogi. So finding ways I can contribute to the community, to the culture it derives from, and constantly learning from them as well. And I have really restructured my own practice, especially since the majority of my audience is Indigenous, and what else I can do. And so it's been a lot of tweaking, modifying, but I'm continuing to learn. And I'm always a student, and I'm always going to learn and teach as safe as I possibly can with as much respect. I also do teach the culture or the history and philosophy in which it comes from now with my newer classes. So just kind of reviving things and making some changes to my own practices as well as I'm teaching others.
Thank you, Victoria. That's so thoughtful, and I just appreciate how everyone's approach to this work is. Gabrielle, if you want to take just a few moments to kind of respond to that as well. I have one last question for us all.
Just to make sure that I don't take up a lot of time, I'll be pretty quick. I think cultural appropriation specifically affected me when practicing yoga, because when I first decided to take a class, I never went back for 3 years. It was the worst experience I've ever had in my life. I took a class where I was a little overweight. I had on basketball shorts. I had a relaxer in, so my hair was tied up. I didn't want to sweat my relaxer out. I hated the music. I hated the space. The instructor rubbed me the wrong way. I was the only person of color in that space at all. And it was just one of the worst experiences for me. And I think that that's probably an experience that a lot of people have that deter them from the practice. And similar to Victoria, I just decided to set out to make this available and relatable to people in my community, because I think that that's something that deters a lot of people from trying new things, is it's not relatable. And, I'm completely aware that yoga didn't originate from my culture, but I also have a great respect for it, and my practice and my sharing of yoga to BIPOC communities is not rooted in any historically violent relationship, which is what appropriation consists of. So I think it plays a big role in an effect of people practicing yoga, specifically people from BIPOC communities. And it's a deep question, but I'm going to limit my answer to that.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Every time you talk, I'm just like, I love you. So yes, thank you. So we have, I have a final question. I know we're getting really close to 7:30. We want to be very cognitive of the time. But I want to go over to Sam and ask the final question, and maybe we can have one or two other folks address that, and then we can kind of wrap it up. Sam, so our final question for this evening, if we, so meaning people outside of your culture, see appropriation happening and we recognize it, what is the best way to fight against the appropriation while also causing the least amount of damage or trauma to your communities? Is there the best way to go about it in your eyes specifically? And that's for Sam, and we can try to figure out what that means. I don't know. Did you understand that?
Yeah, so it's like if we non-BIPOC communities see appropriation happening, what is the best way to call it out and in a least harmful way?
Yes, without like re-traumatizing the way that goes down a lot of the time.
Yeah, so like that is, because each situation, like each person, each community is very different. So you have to look at each thing base by base. You have to like really analyze, is it really like having a negative impact to a said community that it's affecting, or is it done in a way where it's creating like a positive reaction to that community? If it's a negative one, then I would call it out and explain why this is not helpful to the community that it's appropriating from. If it's positive, I would make suggestions to that person or group or practice to where they can make it stronger and be more inclusive to said communities that it's affecting. And that, again, it's like, you have to look at it case by case. You can't just say that, oh, that's all bad or it's all good or it's somewhere in the middle. You have to like analyze each situation like case by case, in a sense where like you got to like really look at it, like if it's providing like opportunities for BIPOC community members to be seen, to be represented, then I would say it's a good thing, and I would just tweak the practice a little bit more so it's more inclusive and it's more authentic to what it's trying to teach. And if it's not, then I would just tell them to maybe like step back from a moment and let those people that are practicing that come forward so that you can learn from them and what they're doing, and a way that will teach you to do yours better.
Thanks, Sam. That makes a lot of sense, and it's, I think there's folks outside of the people, color communities who really have a genuine interest in not trying to re-traumatize. So thank you for that. I'm gonna ask Daniela to respond, and then maybe Kou, if you want to take this, and then I know we have 7 minutes left, so just a little time check. But Daniela, if so, just what's some advice for people outside of our community to combat, I guess, cultural appropriation without traumatizing?
So I'm going to go back to what was said a little bit earlier around having compassionate conversations with those people who are doing the cultural appropriation. So having those conversations first, right? And taking that on yourself is a big deal. So if you're not sure, making sure that you actually have the conversation first with maybe a friend of yours who is from the culture, but not asking them to do the work, right? So that's huge that you're not asking them to do the work and that you'd be willing to go and have this conversation. So that could be the first approach, and then take it from there. So if they're still unwilling to hear you, maybe it's more of a community response that's needed. And then you would be, allowing the people from that community to lead. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you, Daniela. And Kou, if you want to just take a maybe 60 seconds to respond. I know the Native Governance Center will be wrapping a lot of the presentation up. So if you want to take a couple of seconds to respond to it.
Yeah, no, I actually agree a lot with what Daniela was saying, and that's really similar to what I would say. And I, kind of like the question earlier that was similar, I would just say, really looking to our white allies to really take on the bulk of that work. We're all tired of doing that work, and so you all can go do it and let us know how it goes.
We're delegating now, so we have to-do lists for everyone. So you know what, thank you all for everyone's thoughtful and insightful responses and all the work that you do. There's so much important things that are happening with our within our communities and reclaiming a lot of our wellness and just basically our sanity. So a lot of these places are sometimes the only place that we can go to feel somewhat a part of ourselves. So thank you all for all the work that you do. I know there is a survey that we ask our participants to fill out. And I think will that be sent to everyone, or how will people access the survey? Participants will be able to access that. It will be sent to you via email today, and feel free to connect with every one of our panelists and the work that they do, and look them up on Facebook and look them up on social media and just support the work that they do. Follow a lot of the Native Governance Center's events. I know that there's an event coming up, I think in October, but just stay connected, and I appreciate everyone for taking the time and sharing the evening with us. Is anyone, Pearl, going to say a few, wrap it up, or am I wrapping things up? I think I'm wrapping it up. So thank you. So thank you to Kou, to Daniela, to Samsoche, to Victoria and Gabrielle. I appreciate this conversation. This is a much needed conversation. I think that this is, just the beginning of a lot of our work. And we should continue to have these conversations in our communities. And thank you to everyone who's here. Thank you to the organizers of the event as well.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Miigwech.
Thank you. Kadamya.